Folks, welcome to the show, Freedom Fighter 1776. I'm your host, Mark Charles Bashaw. We've got a great show today, but first I want to start off with a question, a kind of a big question. Where have all the faith-based, God-fearing, Hippocratically oath-bound doctors been the last 5 years? Because majority of them sold out to this weaponized, experimental medical products that were forced down humanity's throats the past 5 years, specifically referencing the masking of society, the weaponized diagnostics of society with these COVID-19 PCR tests, and then the third order effect of that, which was the weaponized injections to keep your job or jab, right? You go into your doctor and they're coercing and manipulating their patients to partake with this experimental injection. So where have all the doctors been? And I want to answer that question real quick because I was fortunate enough to meet and work with a immensely courageous doctor, a warrior, a faith-based, God-fearing patriot who has really stood up and protected not only service members, because a lot of us were dealing with some darkness in the military, and this individual stood up and shielded us from that, but also her patients as well. So we have a special guest, Dr. Lee Vliet, and I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater here, because there is many good doctors out there. But what I've seen in my experience, in my opinion, a lot of them went along to get along. They didn't uphold their Hippocratic Oath. But today, we're going to talk with an amazing doctor who did, and who she's been at it a long time, folks, doing this. And her name is Dr. Elizabeth Lee Vliet, MD. Dr. Elizabeth Lee Vliet is a physician, patient advocate, and CEO of the Truth for Health Foundation, a 501c3 public charity dedicated to medical freedom, patient-centered care, educational initiatives. She has been a relentless advocate for medical rights, speaking out against governmental overreach in healthcare and supporting those affected by coercive, weaponized medical mandates. Dr. Vliet has been practicing independent, patient-focused medicine since 1986, choosing to work outside of the insurance networks to maintain true physician autonomy. She is the founder of Vive Life Center, with medical practices in Arizona, Texas, and Virginia, specializing in hormone health, neuroendocrinology, mind-body medicine, complex medical endocrine conditions, chronic inflammation, PTSD, and cognitive health. Her unique integrative approach focuses on connecting the dots between hormonal, psychological, and environmental factors affecting patient health. Dr. Vliet has also been a strong advocate for military service members. I can absolutely attest to us, with providing legal defense grants for those facing religious and medical freedom violations, medical guidance and support for those affected by coercive weaponized medical policies, and investigations and reports exposing systematic abuses within the medical healthcare system. She has worked alongside military, whistleblowers, frontline physicians, and legal experts to bring awareness to unlawful medical mandates affecting service members. And she's also got publications. Dr. Vliet is a prolific author and medical educator known for her consumer health books, including Screaming to Be Heard, It's My Ovaries Stupid, and The Savvy Women's Guide on PCOS. She's also a leader of the COVID-19 Vaccine Injury Treatment Guide and co-author of the COVID Early Treatment Guide with Dr. Peter McCullough. Her voice has reached national audience through the Whistleblower Report, a radio show exposing hidden medical and political agendas, Truth for Health, The Rest of the Story, which educated the public on medical rights and patient advocacy. She's also been recognized with awards, 2014 Ellis Island Medal of Honor, recognizing her contributions to health, education, and advocacy, and the 2007 Voice of Women Award, honoring her pioneering work in women's health. She's briefed Congress, appearing on national television, radio, and spoken at medical conferences worldwide on the intersection of faith, health, and medical freedom. And at this point in time, welcome to the show, Dr. Lee Vliet. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Mark. What an introduction. Thank you. It's been quite a ride for actually 45 years in medicine. And I think July of 1985 was when I actually first opened my private practice. And so this is coming up on a big anniversary in 2025.
Wow.
It's hard to believe that many years have gone by.
Incredible. And I mean, you've provided incredible service, not only to your patients, but our nation. And I kind of want to give a little background. Your work when you stood up and you've had Truth for Health for a while, but during the whole pandemic, you created a military advisory group, and you really, I would argue, you saved service members' lives. We had Seth Ritter on the show. He was stuck in weaponized behavioral health. You all helped secure his freedom from that, and potentially saved his life. But I want to go back, to your history and kind of ask you, at what point did you realize something was seriously wrong with the societal system that's been shoved down our throats for so long in this mainstream apparatus of medical media, all these things? Or was it a defining moment, or was it gradual over time?
Well, I think, first of all, it was gradual, and it built definitely over time as I grew in wisdom and grew in experience. But I think the beginning awareness actually was happening during medical school and residency, in some of the ways that I observed that patients were treated, and some of the rigidity in the medical system in the way operational approaches were carried out. Although education was a lot better then than what I see taking place now. But Mark, the other interesting part of that story is that I was accepted later after an established career, and I'd already earned my master's degree. I was accepted at a medical school that in Virginia, Eastern Virginia Medical School, that was new at the time. And they had a very innovative approach to medical education at that time. They've become more traditional as the years have gone on, and more rigid. But at that time, the philosophy was that we could educate physicians to be compassionate and competent, not just competent. And they actually had a philosophy and a grant to focus on human dimensions in medical education and training compassionate physicians. And part of that philosophy was that they wanted to take students who had been out in the workforce for a period of 5 to 7 years and doing something different from medicine, rather than the lockstep high school, college, medical school, and people being a constant student. So they wanted people who had other work experiences. And the average age of my entering class was 32 years old. which is 10 years older than the average entering class of medical school. And the oldest student starting was a married man who was 38. And I was 29 thereabouts. And so all of those of us in the class, and about half the class, were people who had been out doing other things and had other people and life experience. And it was very interesting because there was an awareness of life and people and experience that the older students brought to it. And so I think I was fortunate enough to see things differently. And I had already been in teaching chemistry and biology, and I had a master's in biology and curriculum design. I was active at the state level on curriculum design. So I had a lot of educational experience before even going into medicine, which I think helped me see things differently. But I began to see in medical school and residency things that made me question. And by the time I had been on the faculty, and by that point, 2 different medical schools, University of Kansas, had a joint appointment in internal medicine and psychiatry and behavioral medicine, and I taught family practice residents, OBGYN residents, family practice, internal medicine, psychiatry. I taught residents in all of those specialties. And then Eastern Virginia Medical School, as the head of the family medicine, mind-body medicine. We called it behavioral medicine at the time, but it was what we now call mind-body medicine. And teaching the residents to the family practice doctors in training how to recognize not only physical symptoms, but psychological and people having a crisis of faith. So it was mind, body, spirit focused in the true Hippocratic tradition that Hippocrates wrote about in ancient Greece. And I loved it, but I also began to chafe somewhat at the rigidity of the medical model and the separateness of the different specialties and the fact that patients weren't treated with a totality of the whole person. And so I loved my work on the faculty, but gradually the politics of academic medicine, the rigidity of academic medicine, they didn't want to bring in exercise and nutrition, and I thought that was important. And so finally, I decided to remain on the volunteer faculty and leave the full-time paid position and start my private practice, which was called Health Strategies at the time in Virginia. It was actually in the military area of Virginia. The Norfolk, Hampton Roads, did a lot of work at the Naval Hospital and the VA hospital as a medical student. So I had a lot of experience with the military. I had a lot of military patients in my practice in those days. Because, of course, we have a huge Naval and Air Force and Army presence in that whole area of Greater Hampton Roads. And so that was always a love of mine, and supporting the military families while their spouses were on deployment. And it was a very meaningful time because the practice was oriented around Pythagoras' quote from the 5th century BC. The physician's duty is to teach men and women the physical and spiritual laws of life and to live in accordance with God's purpose for them.
Wow. I love that. And
that,
so, boy,
that
have
was
we
on my
deviated.
Yes, that was the quote on the front of my first practice brochure.
Yeah.
And that was the basis. Health Strategies dealt with mind, body, spirit integration in the patients that we worked with. And we brought in exercise, nutrition, did a lot of work that what's now being focused on with Robert Kennedy. This was work I was doing in my first practice in 1985 and have
Mhm.
continued my whole career. So I think that was the genesis of going. I think it's Ralph Waldo Emerson who said, don't follow the path where others have trod, set
Mhm.
a trail and create your own path.
Yep.
And in many ways, I think God guided me to a different path in medicine. And I've always tried to follow his leading and the sense of where the Holy Spirit was guiding my work, but what the patients needed, because my oath was to the patients, not the insurance companies.
Amen.
And in 1986, so 1 year, not quite a year after I first opened my doors in the private practice, Hampton Roads was suddenly recognized by the insurance companies, managed care, as the 34th largest metropolitan district in the country at the time, if they coordinated everything. And so they steamrolled into Hampton Roads, and we went from 0% managed care insurance programs in 1985 to 40% of the market controlled by managed care plans by 1986. And we had a lot of medical meetings, and I was active in the medical organizations at the time. Of course, I was a young woman, new in practice, and all of these established older doctors, mostly men. There weren't many women in medicine in
Mhm.
1986. And they were all worried about losing their patients and losing revenue, and they had to sign these contracts. And I stood up at many of those meetings and said at the time, if you sign these contracts, you're making a Faustian bargain. You're selling your soul to the devil, because you can't answer to the insurance masters and serve the patients. And that turned out to be pretty prophetic, because that's exactly what we're seeing.
Mhm.
And I was somewhat pressured as a new doctor to sign. I signed one, and 6 months later, I was seeing the conflict that I had spoken about. They were forcing me to choose between what they would cover and what the patient needed. And I told my husband, I said, well, if I lose revenue, I'll just have to lose revenue, and I'll have to find something else to do, because my conscience won't let me live with this conflict and not do what the patient needs.
Right.
So I resigned from that one contract and never signed another one. And I have always operated independently, not in the fancy, trendy concierge model where they charge people an exorbitant fee to be in the practice and guarantee the revenue to the doctor. I just charge the fee for my appointment time, and the patients pay me directly, and then they file their insurance claim. It's really a very simple business model, and one that works very well. And people pay for the appointments they need, and they don't pay for those they don't need, and they're
Right.
not paying premiums for services they're not getting.
Right.
So that's been the foundation of my career, and that has been, I've always answered to God first and the patients second.
Amen.
And
Amen. So,
that's why I did what I did in the COVID era, because I felt like the government agencies and the outside experts who are not treating these people are not the ones who determine what their care needs to be. That's the physician's duty and role.
and you mentioned the COVID era and medicine and the whole pandemic. Did it go into overdrive where this exposure of this system where it's all insurance based, insurance based first, patient second, goes into overdrive? I mean, for me, it's hard not to say it is. I mean, it's so obvious, but I'm talking with individuals, family members who are still psychologically manipulated and going into this medical system and receiving treatment outside of a holistic manner that you speak of, and then they're finding themselves in very dangerous situations.
Oh,
Is this,
no
is it,
question. No question. It was overdrive. It was a, a absolutely heinous, egregious violation of the oath of Hippocrates that we have taken as physicians. Now, the oath of Hippocrates in today's medical schools has been watered down to the point that it's almost a woke, meaningless
but
exercise.
they still have to sign it. Like they're still Hippocratically oath bound as doctors.
Well, yes, a watered down version, but the point I'm making is that not only did what we saw in the COVID medical tyranny violate the oath of Hippocrates, but it violated much of the medical practice regulations that have always been operative. Informed consent. I mean, we have always been required to operate with a consent for treatment in place before we did any treatment of a patient. That's always been the case. That was thrown out during COVID. There was no informed consent for the PCR test, for the masking, for the COVID shots, for remdesivir. In fact, I was personally involved in fighting to save people's lives in the hospital COVID tyranny, where the hospitals were paid money by the government in despicable violations of patient rights to force people to take remdesivir and go on ventilators. I can't tell you the number of cases that in Truth for Health Foundation and our lawyers that were volunteering with us and doctors that were volunteering with us that we absolutely had to go to the mat to try and save lives, and some we couldn't. The hospitals overrode patients' consent for treatment. The case of Grace Shara going forward right now, Truth for Health Foundation was very involved at the beginning of that case, helping her father, Scott Shara, get to the right lawyers, get support medically with medical experts. We did a lot of work on that case at the beginning to guide him medically and legally, and his team has carried it forward independent of any affiliation with us at this point. But we were very instrumental in getting that started and getting him to the right lawyers and identifying some of the medical abuses that had taken place. So I have so many other patients where family members, their consent for remdesivir or their denial of consent for remdesivir was ignored. They were put on ventilators against their consent. It was so egregious that we called it hospital homicides.
Well, and were you shocked to learn, and for the audience out there, they might not know this, but were you shocked to learn how much the hospitals were getting paid for either a COVID positive man or woman, individual child, COVID positive, COVID death, and all of these protocols being pushed on them? Or were you
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I wrote one of the early editorials that was released nationally. I at the time, I was on the editorial writing team for AAPS, the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, the voice of independent medicine. I've been a member of that organization for 30 years, and I was on their national editorial writing team from 2009 to 2023. And all through 2020, I was writing nationally released editorials and doing national media interviews on the abuses under COVID, the cover-ups, the lies, the deceptions, the weaponization of the government against effective, safe hydroxychloroquine and later ivermectin, and the iodine nasal rinses and all of that.
Mhm.
And then the hospital, when I reactivated Truth for Health Foundation in 2021, we began very early. We were one of the first medical organizations to do national press conferences calling for Stop the Shot campaign. Our Stop the Shot campaign launched internationally, broadcast on LifeSite News, August 4th, 2021, and we did 4 international press conferences in August 2021. That month alone, that was the same month that Todd Callender filed the first lawsuit against the Department of Defense.
Right.
He and I met in September 2021. As he was a lawyer we were working with, trying to save people in the hospital homicide situation, trapped in hospitals, being forced into remdesivir and ventilators. And he is the one who said, I've got military service members who are being grotesquely abused in their constitutional rights. Would Truth for Health Foundation give them a platform? And I said, absolutely. And so we created the Military Advisory Council, and we also set up the Medical Freedom Program, the legal defense grant, so that donors who wanted to support medical freedom could give a charitable gift to the foundation, and then we would carry out the IRS rules about awarding legal defense grants, which are allowed for a public charity to do if you follow the IRS rules, which require the grant has to be to defend human and civil rights secured by law, which of course was the case.
Right.
And so we ended up giving over $350,000 in legal defense grants, courtesy of our donors, to mostly military service members. There were civilians as well.
And I can personally attest to that, because I was active duty military, United States Army, at the Army Public Health Center as a public health officer, a preventive medicine officer, medical entomologist, trying to do proper risk communication strategy to warn my chain of command that they must give service members the option to accept or refuse these products and not manipulate them with psychological operations to coerce them into participation. They banned me from all Army Public Health Center facilities for 413 days, and Truth for Health Foundation, Dr. Lee Vliet, really had my back and allowed me on a voluntary after duty hours basis to do proper risk communication strategy, but also gave me legal defense in a court martial they sent me to, and sent me to a court martial where I then was able to successfully put proper risk communication on the record. And the judge said, wait a minute, we can't actually punish this guy because he's a protected communicator.
Right.
And then it went on to more weaponization after that, even though I was found guilty of refusing to participate with their products. But I just want to highlight
which was your right, Mark.
Which not only
were experimental use authorized products. You had a right to refuse experimental products.
Right. Not only a right, but a legal obligation to. It's black and white. And this came out of anthrax debacle, where they were experimenting on service members. They passed legislation to give service members, or you must give service members the option to accept or refuse, which they ignored this past 5 years. And that's why President Trump has come in and said that all these service members must be reinstated. It's not a political thing. This isn't political. This is black and white. The laws were violated, and they destroyed a bunch of service members, and officers knowingly did this. They knowingly violated the law because we properly instructed them with the law and redressed our grievances. And now I want to get back to doctors for a second. Switching gears, going to doctors. A lot of these doctors completely, crimes against humanity. How do we hold these individuals accountable? Will they be held accountable? what do you see that? What do you see that being? Because a lot of these family members, they witnessed this firsthand of what these doctors did. They put my grandmother on remdesivir after we refused, and she died. People don't forget that. People don't forget the names of the doctors. So, how do you see that playing out?
Well, until President Trump and his current team overturn or end the coverage of the PrEP Act, the immunity is in place. And right now, the PrEP Act was continued. I believe it was under the Biden administration that the PrEP Act provisions granting immunity to doctors and hospitals and all of anyone carrying out the covered countermeasures, which included remdesivir and the ventilators for COVID and the COVID shots and so on. I think it was under the Biden administration that was continued until December 31st, 2029. So until the PrEP Act is terminated, the immunity provisions remain in place. And it's not likely that we will see doctors held accountable as I think they should be. However, there has just been a ruling in the European courts that doctors were responsible for pushing the COVID shots in violation of patient consent and what the risks were.
Well, I want real quick, Doc Fleeg, I want to go back to what you just said with the PrEP Act. I mean, that's legalese. That's, yeah, sure. On paper, they're protected in a legal sort of way. But when we're talking about lawful, when we're talking about actual, all of these doctors swore a Hippocratic Oath, right? That is the higher law. That trumps this legal PrEP Act blanket that they might feel like they're safe under. I would argue they're not safe because, at some point, you as a doctor, you got to realize, like, wait a second, like this isn't right. Like, this is so wrong. This is so wrong and so belligerent that.
Well, it's wrong on many fronts. Let's look at a couple of additional points to what you just said. Doctors can be now, medical malpractice suits have not gone forward under COVID because the hospitals and the communities changed the standard of care, and medical malpractice cases require negligence, causal effect of the negligence, and violation of the standard of care. Well, if the hospitals colluded to change the standard of care, and we have whistleblower interviews recorded that were presented in one of our press conferences in 2022 that confirmed that here in Arizona, we know that the hospitals colluded to to lower the standard of care, to withhold nutrition, withhold antibiotics, withhold other treatment, and to use remdesivir. And we know the bonuses that they were paid on the whole hospital bill for use of remdesivir, and the bonuses they were paid. There were many different steps at which the government paid bonuses to the hospitals, and many hospitals made millions of dollars through COVID on those bonuses, denying care to patients. So it's grotesque in the violations. But patient rights were violated. The patient abandonment is another area that could be considered, because patients that I personally treated in my practice were told by their primary care doctors, who should have been doing proper treatment for outpatient treatment of a simple viral illness. They were told, well, I don't treat COVID. So in a sense, a good lawyer could argue that the doctors that refused to treat a viral illness in an established patient were guilty of patient abandonment. And to my knowledge, those provisions, violation of informed consent, and then there's the whole issue of medical tort, the assault and battery, where people were restrained in hospitals and tied in restraints and forced to take medication to sedate them and then put on ventilators against their will and with no advocate being allowed to direct the patient's care if the patient couldn't advocate for themselves. All of these are violations of established patient rights laws that every hospital prints on the back of their consent form when you enter the hospital. So had lawyers, there were not many lawyers standing up for these cases. I know several who did, who were very good, who were overwhelmed with the workload. Todd Callender and Dave Wilson and
Yep.
Don Uballi and Warner Mendenhall and his law firm, Aaron Seary, Liberty Counsel. There were a number of attorneys that did step forward, but out of the many thousands in the US, many of them, like medical groups in these large hospital, big corporate entities, the corporate practice of law, the corporate practice of medicine, in a sense, have sold out their clients to the political agenda. And rather than lose their revenue, they went along to get along, as you said at the beginning.
Do you think they can even recover from it? Yes, now it looks like all fine and dandy, right? Like they're making a lot of money still. They're still maintaining their, belligerent operations and things like this. But the truth, I mean, truth for health, like, it's all coming out. It's not going away. We keep on saying the same thing. And I want you to, after I get done with this question, I want you to talk about the censorship piece, because that's incredibly important.
Yes.
But do you think they're able to maintain this? Because once that censorship piece does come down and there's enough, people becoming aware of how this corporatocracy has really killed an immense amount of people, I would think that independent private practice like you're doing thrives, and that corporate model continues to get exposed and come down. Would you say that's the case? And then how have you been censored the past 5 years trying to get your message out?
Oh, the censorship has been horrific. I was canceled on Twitter. I was actually had a very large initial Twitter account, 80,000 followers.
Wow.
And I put out a lot of medical early treatment for COVID, factual information. I was part of a lot of effort in that regard. And Jack Dorsey canceled my account summarily January 2021 when I was tweeting about the benefits of early treatment and the risk of the COVID shot. I was just summarily shut down on Twitter, shut down on YouTube. And our Truth for Health Foundation press conferences were highly censored. We are still censored, still shadow banned. Even on X, my new account there at Truth for Health is still throttled. And I've never been able, even under Elon Musk, I've never been able to get my larger account reinstated, where I had a lot of content that was very valuable. And we are making an effort to rebuild. We also have a Substack account that we have started in an attempt to reach people. But Microsoft Outlook has censored our emails. AOL will not deliver Truth for Health emails to AOL subscribers. Yahoo censored us. We got blacklisted on NewsGuard. And ironically, when I've been giving sound nutritional advice for literally 50 years in medicine that you're now hearing Robert Kennedy and others talking about, NewsGuard blacklisted Truth for Health Foundation, calling us nutritional quacks.
You know what's interesting, real quick? When I was creating my LinkedIn, not LinkedIn, I think it's called Linktree, my Linktree account, when I put in Truth for Health links on that, it wouldn't recognize them. It would recognize all the others. It wouldn't recognize Truth for Health links.
Well, it's an example of our censorship, and that's what's hurt us. I mean, clearly, they have hurt our ability to get sound information out to people to save lives, which I sincerely believe is God's calling for my work at this stage of life. I didn't plan to be running a public charity at
Right.
the age that most doctors long ago retired, but this was what I felt called to do. I literally felt God saying, Lee, you have the foundation, activate it. This is the time. And I kind of did a start. It was like someone was in the room with me, speaking to me. And I thought, oh my heavens, I do. I went and got the corporate documents because we had established it for a different war in medicine in 2007. This wasn't my first rodeo with COVID. I'd
Right.
been fighting on the front in medicine where they were suppressing effective treatments going back 25 years. And so I got the corporate documents out and I thought, oh my gosh, this is exactly what we need right now. And so I contacted the foundation consultant that had helped me start the foundation with my husband in 2007. And she agreed to come and work with us to oversee the governance and operation and compliance with the IRS rules. And she's still working with us.
Hmm.
I started with her in 2007.
Oh,
And
wow.
actually, it grew out of my work. There was a war on estrogen for women that began in 2002 in an attempt to hide estrogen benefits in heart disease for older women, similar to the war on hydroxychloroquine that came years later under COVID. And in addition, the reasons were similar. Jacques Rousseau was trying to discredit, at NIH, was trying to discredit estrogen as a benefit in heart disease prevention for women to protect statin research money from big pharma coming into his agency at the NIH. That was uncovered in the documentary I was involved in a few years later. So all of this in 2007, that's why I was given the Voice of Women Award by the Arizona Foundation for Women at that time, because I had been a national and international spokesperson on the cover-up of the benefits of estrogen and the fact that it was killing women to be denied having proper hormone therapy as they got older. And in fact, Philip Sorrell at Yale later did a study on the 10th anniversary of this whole debacle in the war against estrogen. And he showed that over 100,000 women had died in the course of that 10 years due to preventable diseases directly related to their being deprived estrogen for a menopause treatment. And all of that was going on long before COVID hit. And that was why some of the wealthy benefactors of the Arizona Foundation for Women, after I was given the award and I gave my speech and I talked about some of these issues, they came to me and said, you need to start a foundation to focus on the straight truth about hormones,
Hmm.
which is what we did.
Right.
And then it was inactivated as a result of the economic crash under Obama in 2009, 2010, when things got so bad. And I had literally forgotten about it. And I do think it was God who tapped me on the shoulder and said, this is the time. And it was 14 years to the day that I heard that voice of the Lord speaking to me to reactivate the foundation. 14 years to the
Wow.
day of when I filed for the EIN the first time, May
Right.
3rd, 2007. It was May 3rd, 2021.
Wow. Well, you
So,
reactivated it in a big way. And arguably, I mean, it saved many lives, many
yes.
service member lives. You allowed myself to come over and do proper risk communication alongside you when the military was when the military banned me and court-martialed me for trying to do that on the inside. So it's been a huge benefit. I mean,
Well,
it's incredible.
look at the word. The first three legal grant recipients, and this is a matter of public record because they're court documents, and these people are coming forward publicly now. Look at the first three legal defense grant recipients from Truth for Health Foundation. Commander Rob Green, who is a leading spokesperson now for accountability in the military, and author of the book, Defending the Constitution
Behind Enemy Lines.
Behind Enemy Lines, exactly right. And Captain Seth Ritter. And you three have been warriors for truth. You've all been part of our military advisory council. You've all contributed greatly to helping others, and you are contributing in the fight even now for military accountability, just as I'm continuing in not only seeking military accountability, but medical accountability. And I have been very, very disappointed in my profession. Medicine should have been focused on taking care of the patient regardless of politics. That was always the way it was in the AIDS epidemic. And I was new in practice at the time that broke. We never asked someone their sexual preference. We just took care of the patient. We don't deny care to diabetics because they still eat sweets. We don't deny treatment for lung cancer to smokers who haven't given up cigarettes. And to deny treatment to those who exercised their proper individual God-given rights to bodily autonomy and refused the COVID shot is unconscionable, and it's despicable, and I condemn any of my colleagues who have done that. And there are many who said, well, I'm not going to treat somebody if they're not vaccinated. Really? And you call yourself a physician? A physician is a sacred duty, biblically and under the Hippocratic tradition. And you will be held accountable by God on Judgment Day. If we don't get accountability in this world, it is coming in the next.
Well, absolutely. It's crimes against humanity on a huge, massive scale.
Well, and Mark, it's even in one sense, it's even worse because one of the greatest, most egregious abuses is someone in power abusing a vulnerable person with less power under them. And the doctor-patient relationship is, by definition, a power imbalance. The physician has a duty not to take advantage of the vulnerable patients who come to them. And that is exactly what happened under COVID. The physicians exercised their power in threats. Look at the threats that transplant patients are still given today. You can't have a transplant. You can't go on the transplant list if you don't agree to a COVID shot. That is still happening in 2025 with all of the data worldwide on the damage of these mRNA shots. It is crimes against humanity, and I'll go to my grave speaking out against it, even if it continues to cost me professionally and financially. I will not stop speaking out on it.
Well, you're a warrior, you're a patriot, you're incredible, and it's been an honor to serve with you, to work with you. Would love to have you back. Where can people can find you? truthforhealth.org and your X account, which I will highlight on the screen right there. So go over, check out Truth for Health X account. Share this information, follow. God bless you, Doc Lee Vliet. Would love to have you back.
Thank you, Mark. And my medical practice website, which hasn't been updated in COVID era, but it's vivelifecenter.com. And I do still see patients. I don't advertise it a lot, but I do still see patients because I care about people and I want people to have a more comprehensive approach and try to help people where medical care is fragmented and their problems are falling between the cracks. So God bless you, and our work together for Truth for Health Foundation and medical awareness, medical freedom, and freedom on all fronts has not ended. You and I will continue this battle together.
Amen. God bless you, Doc Vliet. Folks, again, go over, check out truthforhealth.org. right there, truthforhealth.org, at Truth for Health. I'll also put her personal website in the description below, so go check that out. Appreciate you listening today. As always, Freedom Fighter 1776. God bless and much love.